Hey there, tubers. Today's video is going to be on the 50-hour service on this CT2025 Bobcat tractor. Now, I've owned this thing for about 5 days now, and it's got 50 hours on it already. So it's time for the 50-hour service, and it's a pretty straightforward service. There's not a whole lot that the book requires you to do other than replacing the fluid in the front differential and then replacing the hydraulic filter, which is on the right side of the tractor, and the hydrostat filter, which is right under the step here on the left side. Now, both those filters are very similar, so you got to make sure you get the right one in the right side. Basically, the hydrostat filter is red and the hydraulic filter is gray. And there's a difference on part numbers, but since the new ones were painted from the factory, I wasn't sure, so I had to double check. But they're almost the exact same dimensions and everything, so I imagine unless the threads are different, you probably could accidentally put the wrong one on the wrong side. But they're also recommending anytime you change a filter, hydraulic or a hydrostat on this tractor, that you replace all the hydraulic fluid, which it holds just under 6 gallons, which isn't a boatload, but it's plenty if you have to change that every time. And there's 2 spots under here, one where the front drive line is and it's marked with a red cap, and then back underneath there, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it, but there's a big drain plug that is marked in red. And then other than that, just check your wheel bolts, make sure they're torqued properly, and that's basically it according to the manual. Now, I'm going to add one thing to it, which is I'm going to change the engine oil and filter while I'm doing this. And the reason for that is, if you follow the channel, you'll know that I also have a CT2555, and the one I currently have is my second one, and both the CT5555 and this CT2025 call for the first engine oil change to be done at 400 hours. Now, to me, that is too long for an initial oil change, and I'll link it above, but I have a video of my first CT5555. I ran it to 200 hours and changed the engine oil, so half of what the book calls for, and had it sampled, and it came back through the roof on all the metals in the oil. So some people would say that your filter catches all that, but after having it sampled and how much metal was in the oil, obviously the filter's not catching it all. So to think of that flowing through the engine for 400 hours just kind of sends chills up my spine. So on my current 5555, I changed it at 50 hours, sent that in, had it sampled, and they came back slightly elevated, but not bad. So I think the 50-hour for the initial engine oil change is essential, even though the manual doesn't say it. I had quite a few people comment on my video on the 5555 oil change, saying that their manual said to do it at 50 hours, but I'm not sure what models those were, but it definitely wasn't the 2025, because it says 400 hours for the first one. So I'm also going to do that today, and I'll just kind of take you guys along and show you what I do. Alright, so I'll get underneath here and I'll break the hydraulic filter free and get it changed out, and see you in a bit. Alright, well that's in there, but it was entirely harder than it had to be. Apparently Brutus at Bobcat not only works on the 55 line, but he works on the 25 line too. So this filter, as you can tell, is a little caved in. I had to use a 36-inch pipe wrench to break that thing free. Ridiculous. But that filter number is 6695918. And on the box they just say filter high. It doesn't tell you whether it's hydraulic or hydrostatic, and that's where I think some of the confusion could happen, because the one for the hydrostat says the exact same thing. So it's just a different number. So pay attention to that. And now I'll go over on the other side of this and see what the hydrostat filter is like getting off. Alright, so that's in there now. It was definitely easier than the other one, but still ridiculously tight. I know that where they paint them at the factory, paint might have a little to do with it, but I still think that they were probably put on way too tight at the factory, because I don't think paint would have taken the torque it did to get these off. But now that I've got them both side by side here, other than this one's crushed from me trying to get it off, they are almost identical filters. They're the same height, same width. Other than I didn't check the threads. I don't know whether they'd be slightly different or not, but you could definitely get confused if you didn't know any better. So with that, the hydrostat filter is a 7375650, and again it just says filter high. So if you got one, you better double check, make sure you got the right one on the right side, just in case. So with that, I probably lost a gallon of fluid, so maybe close to 20% of the overall capacity of this thing. So I guess you might as well change it to like the book says, and I'll climb under there and figure out what wrenches I need and let you know. Alright, I'm underneath here now. So this one is a 14mm, and then the big one in the back here is a 30mm. Pull both those, drain out all your hydraulic fluid, and then fill her back up. And I'll crawl out from underneath here and show you where you fill it. So back here at the back of the tractor, on the right hand side, you'll see a red handle. Pull that, and that's your dipstick and your fill port. Now it's going to be a little tight, seeing how the fuel tank and the lift arm are kind of in the way, but if you get a long narrow funnel and get it back into this area here, should be good to go. So I'll get that draining, get that filled back up, and move on to the next step. Alright, so I got that filled up. It's just above full, so I'll fire it up, move it forward and back, make sure that I get oil all the way through the hydrostat and the hydraulic filters. Then I'll shut it off and recheck it and top it as needed. So then from there, move on to the next thing that is on the list, and that is checking the brake free play. So that's basically from where the brake is, with nothing against it, till you feel resistance. And I'll get a tape measure and put up there, but you're shooting for about an inch. They say from 0.8 to 1.2 inches of travel. So I'll grab a tape and measure it. Okay, so I've got a tape measure kind of wedged in here. I put it on the same plane as the brake shaft. And what you want to do is you want to push on this till you feel resistance, and then remeasure. So if you can see it there, it's almost at exactly an inch, give or take just a little bit, but I think it's close enough. And if it was out of specs, then you come down underneath here and you'll see this turnbuckle here. You'd break the nuts free on each end and then either twist it in or out as needed. So it's a pretty simple adjustment, and I don't know how often you'd actually have to mess with that, but if it doesn't fall within that 0.8 to 1.2, it's pretty simple to do. So with that being fairly simple, the last thing on the manual list is to check the torques on the front and rear tires here. Now the rear ones are 144 to 166 foot-pounds, and the front ones are 57 to 67 foot-pounds. So you just put a torque wrench on there, make sure they're fall in between those specs, and you're good to go. Now with all that, again, I said I kind of deviate from the manual on this aspect, but I am going to change the engine oil at 50 hours. So there's kind of a unique oil pan on these. Let's see if I can get a better shot here. Okay, now I'm underneath the front axle looking towards the back here, and you can see that the oil pan has two sumps, and that's to allow the four-wheel drive driveline to come right down the center. So because of that, you have two drain plugs, and that will be taken off with a 17 millimeter. And this is not unique to just this model. 5555 is the same way, and I would guess that probably the majority of their tractors are this way. It's just something unique to Bobcat and Kioti tractors. Not a big deal. It just makes it a little harder if you're pulling oil samples to try and get an equal share out of each. But I'll get those draining and then show you where the oil filter is. Alright, so I got that drained and the plugs back in and tightened up. Out of all the drains on this tractor, the only one that they specifically call out a torque value for is the oil drain pans, and that's 23 to 27 foot-pounds. So I shoot for right in the middle at 25, and I think that's good enough. So with those in, my next project is the oil filter itself. Now, again, the engineering wizards have got an electrical line very tight against this, and then we've got a radiator hose running right below it too. So don't know that I like the way that rubs against it, but it must be alright. So I'll try and break this free without damaging anything, and then I've got a fancy flexible oil slide that I'm going to try and get in there. I don't know if I can. Try and divert this oil down so I don't make such a huge mess. But we'll see how it goes, and I'll let you know. Well, that went surprisingly well. This filter was on there as it should be, just hand tight. I was able to break it free with my hand and spin it right off, and very little oil drained out of it. So my little slide caught most of it, and what little it didn't really only dripped down on the front axle here. It wasn't bad at all. So I'm really happy about that. Now the manual does not show this engine in it. This frame size of tractor is in several different horsepower ranges, so they show the higher horsepower engines. But this one just has a little rubber plug to just wiggle in and out, and that's your oil fill. I mean, that's a little cheesy to me, but it must work just fine. Otherwise the manual shows a threaded one up in that vicinity. So this thing holds 6.3 quarts with the filter. So I'll get a funnel, throw that in, and get right back to you. Alright, so I got that all filled up. Should be good to go. Plugs back in, filter's tight. Started it up, let it cycle for a bit, and then shut it off and topped it up. And then after that we can move down to this front axle and I'll show you what's going on there. Alright, I'm under the front end now, and when it comes to changing the differential oil, there's 3 plugs. One here, one right there, and one right there. And that'll get this front axle drained. That holds the same as the engine, 6.3 quarts. And the fill plug is right there. Of course, we've got this nice wire right in the way. So just got to be mindful of that. And I could probably get these 2 in one pan, but I'll have to wait and drain this one after I get these 2 drained, and then I'll get them filled back up. Alright, got that done. And in case I didn't mention what these bolts are, a 14 millimeter will take those off. So you can't be in a hurry on this part of the project. This is 80-90 weight in here, and even though it's a hot day today, it wasn't flowing super fast, so it takes a little bit of time. But filling it back up, I just put in what it called for. It's gonna take a bit to flow down each side of the axle and fill these hubs, but I'll check it here after a couple hours, see where it's at, make sure. And then after that, another spot that I deviate from the owner's manual is, owner manual calls for 100-hour greasing. Now I haven't been using the loader on this tractor, I've been just using the PTO and the 3-point. So I haven't greased the loader yet, but I'm going to today, and I tend to do it probably between 10 and 20 hours usually. And the loader's got these 2 here, 2 here, and then 4 down there. And then if it wasn't for the loader, this tractor has relatively few grease zerks. It has one on the front and the back of the axle where it pivots, and then the only other spots are on the clutch linkage down underneath, and supposedly the brake linkage. Now when you look up under here, this is where it pivots. There's where a grease zerk's supposed to be, but they've put a plug in it. So I'm going to probably pull that plug and put a zerk in there so I can grease that. And then basically the same thing on the clutch side here. Is this pivots here, and the grease zerk is up on top, so it's going to be kind of a pain in the butt to get to, but you can get to it. And other than that, there's no other grease zerks on this tractor. So with that being said, I think that covers the manual and my version of the 50-hour service on this 2025. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.